Hey everyone, this is James from TV, bringing you another Inbetweenisode. Today I will be drinking a Western stored tea, been stored in Wenatchee for 10 years and stored by me for another 10 or 11 years, so about equal parts. These are both in Washington State, pretty different climates we're talking about here. So what is interesting about this? Well, part of it is just to see how slow storage can be. I was talking to someone the other day, and they were talking about how slow Hoda's storage is. Hoda is based in one of the more hot and humid places in the U.S., in Houston. And it is true. It is relatively slow compared to kind of the baseline, if your baseline is southern China or Taiwan, and certainly the tropics, if we're talking about Malaysia or Singapore or whatnot. But unfortunately, things can be a lot worse. And, Kunming storage and Yunnan sourcing have gone a little bit out of fashion on certain circles. So I feel like people haven't quite experienced how slow storage can be in other parts, specifically Kunming, but also places like Seattle, where, we're known to be kind of a rainy place. But unless you are having that extra ingredient of heat, you're not necessarily going very fast. So this tea is the Menghai Peacock. It's a pretty expensive tea. It's certainly more expensive than kind of the quality material would dictate. Nonetheless, the point isn't necessarily the tea, but how slow tea can be. I think a tea like this, which I will describe in a second, definitely needs that good storage. You can see the rinse is coming out quite dry there. So just going to do a quick one there and move to step number one. Make sure this water is nice and hot. Using a little bit of a modified ratio here, 3 grams. And this tea is not without its charms, even with this slow storage, but it is definitely not even close to living up to its potential. And I think when it comes to boutiques, it's one thing to have drier storage. I think you can get away with it a lot more. Those Wu Wei Sanfang teas are kind of a good example of that, where you have certainly drier storage. I think factory teas would have been pretty awful in those conditions versus something like this, which is kind of an old school, strong factory tea. So I gave that probably too short of an infusion, but I can smell it. It's smoky, it's barbecue. We're going straight to kind of that category. So this style of tea, Menghai tea, Shaoguan tea to perhaps an even greater extent, it really does need time, and it also needs heat and humidity to transform in kind of an appealing way. I will admit that this tea, because I got it as kind of like a partial cake, I didn't really store it properly in my storage. It's kind of annoying to have these like quarter of a cake or whatnot. So I don't bother storing those in the same way in like my big long-term storage. So I do suspect that it would be doing a little bit better if I had gone through the trouble of doing that. But I thought this was a fun one just to share with people and pass around. And so I'm kind of at the end of my half cake of this. And so, yeah, it's time to bring it on to an episode, see how it's doing. And it really has not, it's hard to compare experiences from 10 or 11 years ago directly to this, but at least on the surface level, I can't say that this tea has evolved or aged a whole lot, which is a little bit concerning because if 21 years, I guess in this case, doesn't get you that far, what is another 20 years going to get you? Is this tea going to taste like 10 years old of Guangdong at that point? I don't think it's one-to-one in that same, or linear in that same fashion, but it does call into question what we are doing here when it comes to aging certain teas in the West. Cheers. That one's a little light. I think I underbrewed that, so I'm going to wait for infusion number 2 here. But yeah, definitely kind of barbecue-y. Maybe some pine wood in there. Whew. That is some stuff. And this is why I think it's really interesting what people like Marco and others have started to do, including Denny, in terms of heating their tea. I think it makes a lot of sense in terms of aging the tea. And I wish it was something that I could do a little more easily. Unfortunately, my stash is quite unwieldy, so it's a little bit more challenging to do. But perhaps in the future, I will look at something like that, specifically for teas that could really use it. I think things like, Yangqing Hao Boutique, I don't think you really need heated storage for something like that. But when it comes to more factory-style teas and teas that have been intended to age for a while, keeping in mind that tea was originally intended to be traditionally stored, which is couldn't be more different than kind of what we are talking about when it comes to cool Western storage like this. So they were made in a certain fashion, and I think this tea, I don't know if it's exactly the same as they would have made it in like the early 90s or whatnot, but it is still quite strong and punchy. They certainly didn't imagine it being stored in Washington State, I can tell you that much. Yeah, it's just very young seeming. I think if you had this deep mind, you would probably say 4 years, 5 years, something like that. So definitely a far cry from the 21 years of age that it actually is. You gotta raise your kids right. Anyways, I don't have a ton much to say about this tea. It just kind of keeps going like this. It's smoky. It's not without appeal. You can tell the material is at least pretty good when it comes to this. But I'm going to give these leaves a soak, and we will... I'll show you kind of what it looks like, because there's a lot to tell from the storage, from just how green these leaves look after brewing it all the way out. Okay, so we are looking at the wet leaf here, and just look how green those leaves are. Those are very, very green leaves that we're talking about for the Menghai Peacock here. In comparison, I will dump out some Love Forever paper tongue here on the camera's right, and you can see that these are much darker. Despite being, roughly the same age, if we see the Love Forever paper tongue as a matcha cake. And these leaves on the Love Forever paper tongue are not even particularly dark, so you can definitely tell quite a bit about the storage and how humid it has been at one point by dumping out the wet leaves after you have brewed it out. So yeah, that concludes this In-Betweenisode. I guess the point is more just to show how slow Western storage can be if you do not take certain precautions. I think most people in Europe as well as the US will have some of this dynamic going on. So thank you all for tuning in. I will see you all next time.